Hey everybody, it's Christine with Zeidman Development, and today I would like to walk you through the address tab in Importacular. So the address tab is part of the free version, so it's available to every organization that has activated Importacular. And in order to use the address tab, you do have to first map a constituent. So if the address tab is grayed out, you probably haven't mapped a constituent yet, but I'm not going to cover mapping a constituent in today's video. I just want to focus on the address tab. The other thing I do want to mention is that today I am walking through a US-based database mapping. So if you're in another country, some of the field names may be different. They may be in a slightly different order, and there may be a couple of options that are different. So just as a warning, that's where we're coming from. Let's go ahead and open the address mapping that I already have done and take a look. So one of the first things that I want to mention about working with an address in Importacular is you do have a choice of whether or not you're going to work with address lines as separate lines or whether or not you want to work with the address as a block. So when you import into Raiser's Edge, it has to go in as a block. So we do have that here as an option, and that's what I've mapped to is the address block. If you only have one address line, it's not going to matter whether you choose the address block or whether you choose address 1. Either way, your address will import correctly. However, if you have multiple address lines and they are in separate lines in your data source, you would want to use address 1, address 2, address 3, etc. One piece I do need to mention about that is that if you have made that address a required field in your Raiser's Edge configuration, you will have to select either address 1 or the address in order to satisfy that requirement. So that will look a little bit different, and that is a piece that some people need a little bit of guidance on. So either of those are there. One other thing to mention is if your address has been typed in with all caps or all lowercase and you want to change that casing, as always, you can work with your field settings. You can change that casing to proper case. You do have the functionality here as well to choose if you want to work with just new constituents, if you want existing constituents, and then with existing, if you want new addresses or existing addresses. Now, this is working with just this specific field. We also have the functionality in the area settings to work with an entire address. So keep that in mind. I'm going to show you the area settings after we walk through the different settings for the fields. But just keep in mind you can work with that. You also can work with conditions here. And if you have a reason to, you can do some data transformations. So if you want to change every instance of the word boulevard into BLVD, you can absolutely create a data transformation for that here. So just to show you a really quick example, let's do avenue. So if my data source has the word avenue and I want to change it to av, I can do that. I don't want this to be an exact match type because I just want to match the word avenue. I don't want to match, I don't want the entire field to say avenue because obviously an address is going to say more than that. So I'm going to work with a word, and then I want to change my complete replace type. I want that to become a partial. If we replace it with a complete, it's going to replace the entire contents of the address, and I don't want to do that. I want to just change the word avenue into the abbreviation av. So it's just a quick example of something you can do with the data transformations in order to clean up your addresses as you import them into Raiser's Edge. You can also see I've got my city mapped. I have defaulted my country. So if you know that all of your donors are in the same country, but country is not an option in your data source, you could choose a default like I did here. I have also chosen to add the gift date as my date from. I can select an info source if I want to. So let's just go ahead and say that it's from online. And then I can decide if I want these addresses to become preferred or not. If you leave it in a neutral state, which is what this box on linked is, if the box has kind of a box inside a box, that means it's in a neutral state. When it's in a neutral state on the preferred, what that will do is all new constituents will have this address come in as a preferred address because every constituent has to have a preferred address. But all existing constituents will have this address added as a non-preferred address. It'll just go on the address tab. So whether or not you choose to leave the preferred box as checked or as neutral is going to depend on what you want to happen for those existing constituents with addresses. So that's just so you know what that does. We can also work with our states. So I want to show you how we can add the functionality to work with data transformation so that your states and your Canadian provinces, so that you have the abbreviations loaded in and you don't have to type them in, and you can change the full name down to the post office approved abbreviation. So let's go ahead and click on our settings here. One thing I do want to mention about data transformations is that casing always matters. So whatever is typed in to your data source, whatever that casing is, it has to match exactly to what's in your from source. So as a result, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to change my casing on this to proper casing, because I know that my casing on my grid that I'm going to load in here in just a second of my data transformations is in proper casing. So I'm going to go ahead and I am going to import a grid. So it's saved in my downloads. I've got my US states and Canadian provinces transformations. I downloaded this from the knowledge base for Importacular. And you can see now that I've populated my grid so that Alabama is going to be changed to AL. Alaska and Arizona. We've got all of the states and all of our Canadian provinces as well. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. And just want to point out while we're here that we also have some functionality on the zip code. So this again is a US database. And if you're working in a CSV, oftentimes that leading 0 gets cut off. So we have added the functionality here on the zip code so that if that leading 0 has been cut off, you can use this checkbox. It's going to go ahead and add that leading 0 if there's only 4 characters and they're all numerical. So that'll help. You don't have to go ahead and change your spreadsheet in any way. It'll just correct that to add that 0. So let's go ahead and save that. So we have now mapped our address and we want to work with our address area settings just a bit. So again, at the end of the row here, we have our address area settings because they work with the entire address. And these allow us to make some decisions about what constitutes a match between the data that's already in Razor's Edge and the data that's in this file, and what happens when there is a match. So you can see that I have chosen that my match settings should be address line 1, address line equivalents, and postcode. So the reason I've added the address line equivalents is because that helps work with things like the word street and the abbreviation ST. The matching up here that we have set it to tells us that what's going to happen is if this matches, we will only update the address in Razor's Edge. We will not add a duplicate. Now keep in mind, as much as Importacular does to match to what's in Razor's Edge, there are some things that are going to happen that Importacular can't account for. So if the constituent spells their street name wrong when they type it in, or if you have it spelled wrong in Razor's Edge, Importacular can't tell that the street name was spelled incorrectly. Most abbreviations are accounted for within the equivalents, but if you use a non-standard abbreviation in either Razor's Edge or they've used a non-standard that's gotten typed into your data source, again, it may not count for that. But where it can account for a match, you can choose the option that it's set on to update what's in Razor's Edge. So what that's going to do is it's going to take whatever's in the data source and it's going to update that into Razor's Edge. If you don't want this to update Razor's Edge, but you want it to just count for those matches, you would change it to ignore when matched, but add new addresses. Alternatively, you could choose the first option and you can always add a new address no matter what. If you want this address to go into Razor's Edge and you don't care if it's a duplicate, you would definitely choose that option. Or if you just want to always update that preferred address, no matter whether it matches or not, you can just update that preferred address. So you have that as an available option as well. Down at the bottom, you do have the functionality to back up previous preferred addresses. So if you're working with existing constituents and you have checked that preferred box, you definitely want to make sure you do this so you can save those addresses and use them in wealth ratings and all of those different things where historical addresses become useful. When you do that, you do want to make sure that you add an address type so that it knows what to give that former address as an address type. And you can add an end date. You can also choose to remove that send mail. We do have a second tab here for these address area settings. The first section of that allows you to determine what happens if address fields are blank. Just as a side note, if you're importing new constituents, you will still see some blank addresses because Importacular can't override the fact that Razor's Edge will create a blank address if there is no address when you're creating a new constituent. So that can't be prevented here, but this can prevent adding a blank address to an existing constituent. The other piece on this tab is working with relationships and address sharing and addresses on relationships. So that section is only available if you have one of the relationship paid destinations, such as individual relationships and organization relationships. Let's go ahead and take a quick look at our email address. So the email address and the phone number obviously do look the same. We click on the same button to map them. So I'm just showing you one of the two just as an example. So make sure that you always map the actual email address or the actual phone number to the row that says phone number. Oftentimes people see the green circle here on the type where it's required by Razor's Edge, and that's where they try to put that information. So make sure you get it in the right spot. One other thing I do want to point out to you is that you can use the do not contact, the inactive, the primary, and you can import directly to those. So if you're looking to update email addresses that are already in Razor's Edge, say you have a third-party email provider and they have given you a list of unsubscribes, and you want to put a do not contact directly on the email address, you can absolutely do that using Importacular if you have something in your source field that tells you that we need to mark this as a do not contact. So those are just some of the different things available. You can map more than one address. You can map more than one phone number. Those are all options available to you on this tab. I hope that this has been helpful for you as you work with mapping addresses and phone numbers in the Razor's Edge. Thanks so much for joining me today and have a great day.